Hey guys, this is Dr. Vardaman. This is Chapter 15, Organization Structure. Let's get started. What is organizational structure? It's how job tasks are formally divided, grouped, and coordinated. Structure is essentially how the organization is set up, how work gets accomplished. There are 6 key elements, as you see here on the slide. Specialization, departmentalization, chain of command, span of control, centralization and decentralization, and formalization. In this lecture, we're going to talk about each of these elements, when more of one is more appropriate than when less is more appropriate. And so let's move on. Specialization. It's just the degree to which tasks in the organization are set into separate jobs. So in other words, do you have an organization full of specialists or full of generalists? You divide labor, makes more efficient use of employee skills, increases skills through repetition, and there's less between job downtime and increases productivity. So think of an assembly line. You have specialists who paint, who screw in nuts and bolts, who assemble certain things. They don't do everything. They just do one part of the process. Okay, this can create greater economies and efficiencies, but it doesn't always. Sometimes you need more specialization and sometimes you don't. And it kind of depends on the environment in which you operate in and what the conditions are for your organization. So you see here, if you have too much specialization, you reach a point of diminishing returns. At that point, you want job enlargement. You want to make the job more general instead of more specialized, because you get sort of a negative impact from human factors. You know, a person sits there and screws in a screw all day for 8 hours a day, and that's all they do. That sort of creates a lack of productivity, a lack of motivation, a lack of incentive to keep going. And so you kind of have this sort of mid-level, this sort of inverted U-shaped relationship here for when specialization is most appropriate. There are other times when specialization is not as appropriate as well, and that's when you're in a highly innovative situation, and you need someone to be thinking about sort of the whole picture instead of just one aspect. Departmentalization. Simply how jobs are grouped together in the organization. They can be grouped together by function, so say marketing, accounting, operations, things like that. It can be grouped together by the product, so you could be the iPod group or the iPad group or the Mac group. Could be geography. You're in the Starkville group or the Little Rock group. The process in which you're engaged in, or the customer. You could have certain customers, if say, like, for example, Lockheed Martin is a big client and then Boeing's a big client, you could be in the Boeing group versus the Lockheed Martin group. So that's another way of organizing the company is departmentalization. Chain of command. That's how much authority you have in your organization. So authority, the rights inherent in a managerial position to give orders and to expect orders to be obeyed. Chain of command is just a line of authority. It extends from the top all the way down to the bottom. It clarifies who reports to whom. And then unity of command. This is simply a subordinate should have only one superior to whom he or she is directly responsible. There's a famous line in the movie Office Space where a guy has 8 bosses. It's completely demotivating. So your chain of command should be unitary. An individual should report to only one person so that you don't have sort of this controversy in the person's head of who they report to, who they should be serving. Span of control, that's just simply how many people a manager manages, okay? Who's within their span of control. Wider spans of control increase efficiency. Narrow span, there's some drawbacks. It creates additional layers of management, which we'll see on the next slide. There's increased complexity of vertical communication, and that means that you have to go through more people to get your message up to the top. And it encourages too tight of supervision, too much micromanagement. So a wider span sort of allows for more discretion from the employees. We'll show you here. Here's contrasting spans of control. So if you want your manager, each line of authority to have a span of 4, you see you have 2 extra layers there of bureaucracy. So you have 7 levels instead of 5. If you have a span of 8, you have 5 levels. Okay, so you see there, when you have a bigger span, people have more discretion about what they do. If you have a smaller span, it encourages micromanagement. So there's going to be sort of too much supervision going on. I'll say this really needs to be set out according to what the needs of the organization are, though. There are certain times when maybe having a span of 8 is good because you really don't want your people innovating. You don't want them engaging in discretion. You're going to want more of, directed work, them doing exactly what they're supposed to do when you're trying to gain efficiency. Centralization, that gets us to centralization and decentralization. Centralization is just the degree to which decision-making is concentrated at a single point in the organization. Decentralized, that's when people get to make their own decisions throughout the organization. There's pluses and minuses to each approach. It kind of depends on your environment. If you're in an environment where you're demanding efficiency, where you really, you don't have a lot of need for innovation, you don't have a lot of need for improvisation, having more centralized can be good. If you are in that situation where you need improvisation, decentralization can be a good thing. Formalization. This is just how standardized the jobs are. And this kind of gets back to specialization a little bit. Specialization is more along the lines of, I do one thing, I'm very specialized. Formalization has to do with how much discretion the worker has over how they do their job. Okay? On an assembly line in a factory, you want high formalization. You want that process to be done the same way over and over and over again. That's what you want. But in other jobs, like say, for example, a person working behind a lunch counter, there's going to be less formalization because they can't be programmed. People are going to alter their orders. People are going to want different things. And so you're going to have to give some discretion. Jobs kind of go up and down the continuum of this. Programmers, for example, are not super formalized because they, again, they need discretion to figure things out. But like I said, the assembly line in a factory is the best example of where high formalization is in place and is needed. Let's look at some common organizational designs here. This first one is a simple structure. There's a very wide span of control here, low degree of departmentalization, wide span of control. The authority is centralized in a single person, but there's little formalization. You see here, this is a very, what we call flat organization structure. These people all have a lot of freedom to do what they need to do in their job. And it's because this Jack Gold, the owner-manager there, he can't direct all of them all the time. So he can't micromanage. He's got too many people to supervise. And so these people have a lot of discretion. You want a simple structure like this when you need that discretion, when you need your people to be creative or to handle things themselves. Bureaucracy, sort of the opposite of a simple structure. It's a very tall structure. There's a lot of specialization, formalized rules and regulations, tasks that are grouped into functional departments. Authority, again, is centralized, and there's a narrow span of control. People have just a few people under them, and you have a very tall organization. Here are some strengths of bureaucracies. You get economies of scale. You don't get a lot of duplication of personnel and equipment. Communication can be enhanced, although, there's an argument that can be made that, if you want to get to a manager 3 levels above you, it's very difficult because you got to go through 3 people, but there's more communication in essence because there's narrower spans of control. Some of the weaknesses: subunit conflicts with organizational goals, obsessive concern with rules and regulations, and lack of employee discretion to deal with problems. Somebody's always passing the buck. Well, I've got to talk to my supervisor. They have to talk to their supervisor to handle a problem. Think of the government in this situation. Think of when you go to the DMV. What a horrible, miserable experience that is. And a lot of that is a outcome of the bureaucracy that's in the government. The government's a very bureaucratic organization. That's why they're very inefficient at everything they do, and they are not very responsive to the needs of their customers, the public. Matrix structure. It's just a structure that creates dual lines of authority, combines functional and product departmentalization. It kind of gains the advantages of functional and product departmentalization while avoiding their weaknesses. It allows you just a little bit more leeway in dealing with these problems. It's not quite as inefficient as a bureaucracy. A new option, the virtual organization. This is where people don't actually work in the same place. It's virtual, as in it occurs in a technological environment, not in person. It's a small core organization, outsources major business functions, provides flexibility while concentrating on what the organization does best. So they have a goal, they have an objective, and they do their own thing, and then the group brings it together and creates a product. And it's virtual. The key thing here is they're not together. They communicate online. Boundaryless organization. It's an organization that eliminates the chain of command, has limitless spans of control, replaces departments with empowered teams. You sort of eliminate these boundaries. You don't have departmentalization. You just have one big organization. And it breaks down external barriers to customers and suppliers. So here's two extreme models. The first is the mechanistic model, the one on the left there. The thing I want to get across to you between the mechanistic and the organic model here. The mechanistic model is appropriate when your environment is very stable. When you know that you need to produce X number of units in X amount of time, you know the demand is there for the product, and you're looking to gain efficiency. That's when the mechanistic model works. The mechanistic model does not work in industries that have a ton of innovation going on. You need the organic model in that situation because you have to have the flexibility to be adapting to the environment at all times. Okay? So the mechanistic model is good for manufacturing of products like, say, automobiles, where the automobile's been essentially the same product. I mean, there have been alterations to it, but it's been essentially the same product for a very long time. The organic model is more appropriate in situations like, say, computer software, where changes are rapid, where customers are demanding new things, every year. And so you don't need that high level of specialization where it's hard to get a message going somewhere. What you want is flexibility for your employees to create new products. To finish up here, the 4 reasons structure is different. Number 1 is the strategy. If it's innovative, you want an organic structure, like I talked about. You don't want that mechanistic structure because you need the discretion. Organization size. The bigger the organization, it's just going to become more mechanistic because you're going to have more people, and one person has a maximum span of control at which they can be effective. So you're going to have more mechanistic organizations the bigger organizations get. Steve Jobs strived to keep his organization organic, but because it got so large, it became more mechanistic over time. Technology, custom activities need more organic structure. You can't get that stability in your organization that you need for a mechanistic structure, so you got to stay organic if you're going to have custom activities. The more routine, again, the more stable everything is, the more mechanistic you're going to be. And then finally, the environment. If the environment's changing, again, organic is best. If you have a stable environment, you're going to want more mechanistic. You can gain efficiencies through a mechanistic structure if you have a stable environment. That's it for org structure. See you guys in class.